everyone. Welcome back to the White Coat Club. My name is Lindsey, and I'm here with Nicole. We're both counselors at Moon Prep. Today, we have a special guest with us, one of our coworkers, Megan, who also is an admissions reader. And so we're going to ask her a little bit about her perspective of reading applications and, what she kind of thinks about as she reads applications too. Now don't forget to like and subscribe to get more BSMD and med school admissions advice. Okay, so before we dive into the content, Megan, can you share with us a little bit about your background as an admissions reader?
Yeah, so I've been an admissions reader for a few colleges for about the last 3 years or so. And in being an admissions reader means I also have to have a background in higher education in general.
Perfect. So I feel like this is like the big question that parents always ask us. Can you share the process of the admissions reader? As in, like, do you get the full applications or are you just reviewing GPA or sorry, just reviewing applications, or do you also look at like GPA, SAT? Essentially, like, what do you start with?
So yeah, in admissions reading, we look at the whole thing because the biggest thing with being admissions reading is we're doing a holistic review. So I start off with, like, for example, like the Common App, like your general personal information, what high school you went to, your GPA. And then we look at like your test scores, and then obviously we start looking at the activities you listed, so the clubs, the sports, anything you were involved in, and then we get into some of the recommendation letters and the essays.
Perfect. And how do you review the application?
So how we review it is, so we start off with the personal information. We kind of get the picture of where the student came from, like what high school they went to, what their region was. We look at their GPA, then we kind of compare that to like what courses they took. Like, did they take a lot of AP classes? Did they take really easy classes? Like, did they challenge themselves? And then we take a look at like what did they do with their extra time? So did they have a very full activities list? Did they have a really small one? And then, so being as detailed as possible is super important because, you spent 4 years preparing for college, so you want to demonstrate that. And then we spend most of our time reading the essay because that's where the student really gets to show themselves. And sometimes they'll mention something in the essay, and that will kind of like change our perspective, like, oh, they overcame an obstacle, or if they have to like work while taking classes. And so, what they reveal in the essay, sometimes I'll go back and reread the activities or look at their GPAs and stuff, be like, okay, they had like this problem, and that might explain why they maybe got a lower GPA or how they overcame it.
Thing you mentioned was like, you're looking at like the APs that they took and if they challenge themselves. I feel like a lot of families get kind of caught up in like the number of APs that they take. That's not necessarily like something you're looking for, like, oh, they need to get X number of APs by the time they graduate. It's more about like, did they take advantage of the opportunities they had, right?
Absolutely. I'm looking at where the student came from. What did they do with their time? Did they show the initiative to use all the resources that they had? Like sometimes some high schools don't offer APs, they only offer like honors. Some don't have any APs at all, or others have like all the APs. And I would notice if a student had like 20 APs available and they didn't take any, it's like, okay, well, why didn't you challenge yourself?
That's a good point to bring up that not every school offers the same thing, but just taking advantage of what is offered to you and being strategic with it.
You kind of review kids from like different, like the same schools at the same time. So if you had like seven applicants from like a certain high school, like Los Angeles High School, would you evaluate all of those together? Not necessarily comparing them one versus the other, but just you don't have to like review curriculum over and over again. Is that kind of the structure of how you normally do it?
No, it's kind of like a mixed batch. So that way it prevents developing bias. So I'll read, sometimes they'll be in like the same region. And then it's like, okay, so I know these students came from this region, but I'm not reading like the same school back to back because then that kind of starts an unconscious bias of where you start comparing the kids directly. And we want to avoid
Oh,
that.
interesting. Okay. Um, that's really good to know. And so that's, I feel like, a question kids always ask me, like, well, one kid from my school got into MIT, like means that they're the only ones who are going to get into MIT that year. And I'm just using MIT as an example, of course. That's not the case. Like, you could accept any number of kids from a certain high school. I don't know if you can share that.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, what high school you came from only matters a tiny portion. It's really like, what did you do? And like, because you're not comparing just to your high school, you're competing against thousands of applicants. So it's like, what did you do that was different? And what did you do with where you came from? What resources did you use?
Mhm. Perfect. I feel like a lot of families need to rehear that. It's all about like, and that I'm assuming is true for med school admissions as well. If we were to talk to admissions readers there, it's all about like, taking advantage of the opportunities you have. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, because students definitely panic. Even when I was a school counselor, like in the area that I live in, they would say, well, I know that my 10 friends are all applying to Duke, so
Mhm.
I have lower GPAs than them, so I'm not going to get in because they're only going to take 5 of us. So it's
Mhm.
definitely good to hear.
Yeah.
As you're evaluating applications, is there like one component that is more important, or is it very much, as they always say, like it's very holistic? Is that actually true?
Yes, everything is super holistic. But to me, the most important piece is the essay because that is where you are demonstrating yourself and you're putting your best foot forward. And that's really the only time you can speak to the admissions reader. Because everyone's going to have a transcript and the activities list, but the essay is the only time where you put in your voice and you're able to explain your life story and where you came from and what you overcame.
Perfect. I would agree. As someone who helps kids with the applications, I feel like the way to showcase who you really are and your interests and like what kind of person you're going to be on campus isn't your GPA. It's definitely like your your essay kind of can show that. So that is good to hear that we're not wrong in that assumption. Now, what advice would you give to someone who's about to submit their application?
It's really important to take the time to check, just to triple check everything. You want to make sure that your personal information is correct. You want to make sure that your activities list is as full as possible. And then again, spend as much time as you can on the essays. It's like make sure you answer the prompts, make sure you showcase who you are, that there's no typos, that it's accurate. You have like a really interesting hook, that you're not just copying pasting a random essay that you found. Like you really spent time on this because again, you're presenting yourself to strangers and you're putting your best foot forward.
If there is a typo, is it like a huge deal breaker?
No, but if I see a lot of them, then it kind of gives me the impression that you didn't spend enough time on this and you kind of like rushed through it. So then it gives the impression that this really isn't that important to you.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
A good
Yeah,
point.
I would say the same thing. I mean, especially if you're taking a lot of time, like you probably wouldn't have a typo, but if you're doing things very last minute. I had a student that I worked with um in the past who sent like his Common App. It was just like his basic essay, but it went to a lot of other schools that he wasn't just using the Common App like application. He was using the traditional platforms like on their schools websites, and we read this thing so many times. And for whatever reason, he ended up uploading a version that wasn't like the most latest version. And there was like one tiny
No.
like misuse of the word. I think it was there. And it was like so silly. We had fixed it in the original, but I think that was the only edit. So he still had the other one. And he was so upset that it was there.
Poor
But
Oh
guy.
yeah, minor typos like that aren't a big deal. But if I see a lot of them, or
oh, that's
like they say like, oh, my parents were never married, but they have the same last name. It's like, okay, well that's contradictory. Like, did you just check random boxes?
oh, so you're like
Mm,
looking for holes in their story too, kind of.
I'm looking. No, I'm just looking at everything. But if I notice there's like conflicting information, I'm just gonna
Yeah.
that's gonna cause some extra confusion of while I'm trying to understand this person's story.
Yeah, I'd be confused. I think that makes sense. They're talking about like a sibling, but then they don't report that they have anyone else that lives in their house or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Megan, how do admissions readers level the playing field for students who have different GPA formulas? I feel like I get this question constantly.
Yeah, and I've seen high schools use percentages. I've seen them use a 4.0. I've seen them use 110. Like there are so many different GPAs. So each university has their own formulas in calculating GPAs, but this varies from university to university as it does from state to state because everyone has like different general education requirements that they want to fill. So like how the UCs would calculate their GPAs can be very different than an Ivy university on the East Coast. So those are always recalculated. And then some schools will count like, AP classes and others won't. So it's really important that each school does it on their own and and part of the application is recalculating those GPAs based on the specific classes that they require.
Okay. That makes sense. And then I kind of have a follow-up question. If you're looking at the school report and you're kind of seeing that they're smaller schools and you're seeing that they offer a lot of AP courses, but maybe the student didn't take a ton. Do you take into consideration that the sections of those courses might have been only like one section offered and they might not have been able to fit in their schedule? Coming from like the counselor side of like the school counselor side of things, I know so many students who want to take like AP Calc BC and AP Chem and AP Physics, let's say, but like they're all offered the same periods or two are offered the same periods. So the student ultimately has to make a decision because it's not like there's 6 of those classes offered at the same, in the same year. So I'm wondering how students like combat that or if it's an issue.
It's not so much as that's not really the issue, is more of a did they at least take at least one or two APs? Whereas like say they have, 3 different APs offered and they didn't take any, as that's going to raise more red flags than what APs they took. The fact that they took some shows that they're challenging themselves.
I guess that's like an interesting question too. So like if they are a math like applying as like a math major, um, if they didn't take like every single like AP math that was available, like they couldn't fit in like AP stats or whatever, that wouldn't necessarily be like a red flag to you.
No, because I would say they probably took, AP calculus. But
Hmm.
if I see a math major and they only took algebra 2, I'm gonna be wondering what happened.
Hmm. Okay, that makes total sense. Okay. And of course, as like independent college counselors, some people might ask us this question, and we've definitely wondered the same thing is like, can you tell, or do you even suspect if a student has worked with like an independent college counselor or had like outside help in some ways? Like, is that something that's really obvious in the application review process?
So I always appreciate a well done application that is free of typos and mistakes. But obviously everything should be in the student's own words. So if a student had outside help, that's fine because people get help editing their essays all the time, whether it's friends, teachers, a counselor. Um, it's fine even to have people help you with brainstorming, editing, and review. But again, the essays and the activities have to be written by the student because it's going to be really obvious if a 17-year-old's writing an essay versus a seasoned professional who has like a business, who has like um, years of experience in the area. So we would be able to tell like, if something's not written by the student.
Mhm.
That's interesting to see. Like you can tell the voice is not coming from a 17 or 18-year-old. But you're saying if they just have edits or like maybe some help, it's not as obvious as if someone's physically writing it for you.
Right. And so like obviously that's like a super big worry would be like fraud in a college application. So as long as the student is like doing it themselves and they have outside help, that's fine because it's still coming from the student's voice.
Yeah. That kind of brings into our next question. And I already know your answer to this because we've discussed it in the past. But I know you are able to suspect if a student has used ChatGPT, but like maybe if you want to explain it a little bit further and like what that process is like.
I dislike ChatGPT so, so much. It was so obvious this year that it was used from freshmen to graduate students and even in just everything else I've seen, like a business where I've seen people using ChatGPT. Um, so yeah, it's super obvious. And then it's like there's very specific words ChatGPT uses over and over again. One example is like the word tapestry. And so the second I read tapestry, because like no one uses that word, but then I would see it over and over and over again in essays. And they were written in the same tone, they read the same, and sometimes they didn't make sense whatsoever. And sometimes I would read essays back to back, and I can tell that they were using ChatGPT. So it also leaves the impression of this still was not important because I'm just using AI to write this, and therefore I took the easy way out. So it leaves the impression of like this is super not important. It also shows that like, yeah, I'm probably going to use this, but it's like the whole point of personal statements is to show that you can write at the college level, so you can write essays in college. And using ChatGPT just it does not send a good message.
And you think it has like affected your admissions decision where like that kid you likely would have gotten in if, and it's hard to say, of course, because you don't know what their essay would have been otherwise, but like they were great on paper, but then the essay turned them from like an automatic like acceptance to not? Like does that legitimately happen? Does it affect admissions decisions?
To me, it does, because then I'm openly hostile of like, okay, this person cheated, like they
Mm-hmm.
used this, so like, what are they going to do when they have to write a 20-page paper? Are
Mm-hmm.
they going to use ChatGPT if they can't write a 650-word essay? And like, I would like make notes of like, hey, this is obviously ChatGPT. No.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we tell our kids here too. It's like who knows how much, and from college to college, like how much they're monitoring it or how much they like what kind of system they have, if it's just kind of like a human review kind of thing, or if they have like an actually AI checker. Who knows what it'll look like in a couple years too. But don't use ChatGPT. Start your essays early, and you won't have any problems then. Take that time. It is I think well worth it to showcase who you are. ChatGPT is a machine, and it can't describe you well enough.
Not at all. And using ChatGPT kind of sets you up for failure in college
Hmm.
because your homework, they do run AI checkers.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
It's-
Yeah. I think it's just the easy way out, and
mhm.
like it's the beginning of starting a really hard thing. Being at college is definitely hard. And has its own challenges. So starting off on a bad foot like that and kind of like the lazy foot is not the way you want to start.
Mhm. I
Exactly.
agree though. I agree though. It's like completely cheating. Like what's really the difference between it is plagiarizing too, I guess. I don't know if you can
Yes.
plagiarize a machine, but it's cheating, it's plagiarizing. It's not good either way. It definitely does like put into question ethics and like how strong your ethics are in general too. So yeah, it
Yeah.
makes total sense that it would affect admissions decisions. How about demonstrated interest? Is that something that your like schools that you've worked for tracked? And if so, can you explain that process?
Yeah, so each school varies drastically in how they track interest. So, but every student can demonstrate their interest to the schools through their supplemental materials and essays like why this major or why us essays. There's also usually an area in the application where students are able to put additional information. Um, so it's really important to take the time to show why you chose that school, whether you're mentoring specific professors, programs, research areas, etc., because this shows that the student did their homework and they really thought about why they're applying instead of just like, mass applying to all these colleges just because they're top name. It makes the student stand out more in the application while versus, the dozens that you're reading, because it shows that you took the effort to stand out and be like, hey, I did my research, just like you would for a cover letter for a job. Each one has to be personalized. And you can tell those who just applied to a bunch of schools and then didn't take the time to answer those essays or show that they did the research. Because it helps the university show that like, yes, you're specifically interested in this university because X, Y, and Z. And it shows that why it also tells the admission reader why you're a good fit for that particular university.
Yeah, I feel like the YS essay is the one that gives like kids the most trouble. Especially the first one. I feel like the first one is never deep enough. It's always like really surface level, and then like subsequent drafts it gets better. But I feel like that's one that kids tend to struggle with the most when they're writing it. So it makes sense that it's something that really is important and really showcases who you are at the end of the day, the colleges. and how you'll fit into the campus.
Exactly. And it's also practice for later in life.
Yes,
Like when you're playing.
always.
Always. So what are some common mistakes that students make on their applications?
Oh, there's so many. So just starting
Oh
off with
no.
so just starting off with the biggest one is not spending enough time on the application, the essays, or the activities, and allowing those typos and conflicting information. Since you are representing yourself on paper to a stranger who's reviewing hundreds, if not thousands, of applications, you want to present yourself professionally with your best foot forward. So with any application, whether it's the Common App, the UC app, or the college's personal application portal, take your time to make sure you're entering in all your personal information. Same goes for when you're doing the FAFSA. Be very mindful if you enter in the wrong information, it will cause problems in the record systems, could cause confusion for the readers, and cause even delays in enrollment at your future university. So making sure everything is correct, taking the time to make sure your punctuation is right, because typos, while minor mistakes, still leave an impression. And then with the activities list, the biggest mistake I've seen is being way too short with the descriptions. Yes, most people have a character limit, but I've seen students list just an activity and have no descriptions. That leaves me wondering what they did. There's missing information, and so I'm not able to pull up an impression. I mean, students work hard in these activities for, for 4 years, so tell me about it. So take the time to showcase the accomplishments that you would put on a resume. The more details, the better, because it allows me to have much better picture of who you are. So for example, I would remember an applicant more who states that they volunteered at an animal shelter for, say, 20 hours a week for 30 weeks or 4 years. They led a team of volunteers who started a food drive, versus someone who states, I volunteered at an animal shelter for 2 years. The first one shows that the student took initiative, they have leadership, and they have dedication, whereas I wouldn't have picked up those skills with the second description. So take every possible opportunity to showcase the skills that you picked up while you're in high school. And then with the essays, again,
Oh, do
go
you
ahead.
mind if I interrupt you real quick? So I've had some kids who like probably see on Reddit, like people who are like super creative with the activity list. Like they're not necessarily giving like descriptions of like what they did, but they might like showcase. I wish I had like an example. I should have looked this up beforehand. But they might showcase personality. They might like make little jokes in the activity list, like descriptions. It seems like a big risk. Have you ever seen kids do that kind of thing where they're not using it like in a super traditional way? And do you think it could be effective?
Yes and no, it's not, because the activities list is to showcase the skills. So if I see a joke in
Hmm.
there, I'll laugh, but then it's like that doesn't tell me what you did or what
Hmm.
leadership or what you accomplished.
Yes. Okay, perfect. That was my instinct too. But then, of course, like one person got into Harvard doing it. And so, like, maybe it worked once, maybe it was like other things. You never know what happened. Um, Maybe they lied, who knows? But that's good to hear too.
Yeah, and also kind of like also helps like being it also makes it then being truthful, because like you know because if you're lying, you're not going to have that clear of a description. So
Hmm.
honesty is the best policy. uh,
Hmm.
and then another thing is like the essays, um, whereas this is the most important part. So obviously doing it in your own words. I see a lot of students rush through their essays and they don't put in the effort, so they don't answer the prompt. I've seen students copy and paste essays meant for different schools in the wrong application. It's like, oh, this essay was meant for Duke and they're applying to Harvard, and it's like that shows that nope, student did not care. And you also want to show, like, the essay shows what's important to you, where you came from. I mean, you spent 4 years preparing this application, so just take the extra time to do it, because man, just seeing the wrong essays is an immediate like bad impression, because it's like, okay, well, I don't even want to read this essay because it wasn't meant for this school.
Yeah, definitely. That's like a nightmare. That's a total nightmare.
And I've seen it quite often.
Oh no. Is there anything that you like really enjoy seeing on an application?
Uh, so I just love reading college applications. To me, it's fun, and this is why I do it. But I love reading the essays. I love getting pulled into the students' world. I love seeing where they came from, what they're passionate about, what they did. And because everyone is so different, some students have done like really amazing things and others have overcome like super big hardships. I've seen kids like work full time and go to school full time and I'm like, how is that possible? And others have been like doing research that like I haven't even seen like undergrads do. So it's just really fun to see what each person did. So I just wish everyone took the time to put their best effort into the applications because it helps me understand who they are and where they came from so much better.
Love it. Completely agree. Yeah, that's I think my favorite part of the job too is like seeing all the cool things that kids do. It humbles me because I'm like, you guys are much, much younger than me and done some like amazing things, and so unique. And a lot of kids are really, really driven to achieve their goals. So yeah, I would agree. That's like definitely the thing I like to see the most working here at Moon Prep as well.
It's
Um,
it's my absolute favorite thing is getting to read the personal stories.
definitely.
Yeah, some of these kids have done so much more than
Yeah.
I've done, and then, it's just wild to see and hear about all of their accomplishments that they've only done.
Okay. Anything else we should know about your job as an admissions reader?
Basically, we do take the holistic thing very, very seriously. So whether if a student has like a 3.0 or a 4.0, I'm spending time on each application. So students shouldn't think like, oh, I have this, I shouldn't even try. It's like, no, do your best and put your best foot forward because I'm giving each and every single person the same chance, the same amount of time on each application.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Megan, for all of your insights. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed it as much as we did. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great content, but we'll see you in 2 weeks.